You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Well, it is that time of the week. It's a very good morning now to Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis.
Oh, good morning to you, Colin, and good morning to everyone.
Well, we might, we've got an interesting topic today, but we might start with a correction, David.
Yes, I was wrong 2 weeks ago I wasn't sure whether Fiji was back in the Commonwealth. Now it is. It was readmitted into the Commonwealth on September the 26th, 2014. So when Sitiveni Rabuka had his coup, they were kicked out of the Commonwealth. Then in 1992, when he restored parliamentary government, they were readmitted. Then in 2000, when George Speight had his coup, they were kicked out. And then in 2001, I think, they were readmitted. And then in 2006, when Frank Bainimarama had his coup, they were kicked out again for the third time. And then on September the 26th, 2014, when parliamentary government resumed, they were readmitted, and they are still there to this day.
Very concise, David. Thank you for that adjustment. Well, it's interesting for the fact that we've had nearly 4,500 downloads of that program since it went to air. So I'm wondering whether they were a trifle upset that they were misrepresented as not being in the Commonwealth.
Well, that didn't upset them. But no, there was claims by the Law Society that I acted improperly, which I didn't. And so there's been looking at it, and like most things in life, there's probably slightly over half say, good on you, Judge, it was good. And then the other half say, kick him off the Supreme Court, he shouldn't be there. So this is life, isn't it?
It's nice to know that there's some common threads between Fiji and Australia all
I
over
must
the world,
admit,
really.
I am pleased to know that the majority are completely supportive.
Nice. It's always the way when news is delivered. One side likes it, the other side doesn't.
Oh, of course. I mean, that is part of a parliamentary democracy.
All right. Today's topic is Fabianism. Very. I love the name. I really do.
It's a good
I think
name,
to myself,
isn't it?
I think some sort of yuppie with a slick back haircut is the image that I get straight away, but it's not that at all.
Well, there was a heartthrob in the early 1960s. All the girls loved him. He was called Fabian.
There you go.
And he was a bit of a crooner.
Well, we'll start with the definition, David, shall we?
You tell us, because you know.
Look, you are the expert. You're here as the talent. For me, I've done the research. I've loved what I've read.
Yes. Well, look, Fabianism really grew out of the writings of Marx and Engels. Now, after the First World War in 1926, a school in Frankfurt University in Germany became known as the Frankfurt School, and they were all philosophy and political science lecturers. There was others as well who really picked up on Fabianism. Fabianism grew in England in the 1890s. It still exists today, and the rumours are that about 95% of the current Labour members in the British Parliament are Fabians. And evidently, there's rumours that people like Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese are Fabians.
I was reading that there's an Australian Fabian Society.
There is,
They seem to not like Morrison very much. All the articles on the front page are Morrison bashing.
Well, right. Well, let's have a look. Karl Marx, as everyone, I hope, if you've not gone into it, Marx's writings were really a philosophical critique of modern industrial capitalist society in England in the 1880s. And he looked at the inequities, the terrible wealth of nobles and aristocrats and professionals, and the beautiful housing they lived in and access to things compared to the people who lived and worked in the factories in the middle, or in London, Middle England, North England, and what became known as the dark satanic mills. And he looked at that just terrible discrepancy in human life And his view was that this is all caused by capital. That is, people who make millions and live in accordance with that, purely using the majority of us as labour force. And you're paid for your labour. Yes.
We could probably wave in a few of those deadly sins too. Gluttony, greed.
Yes, definitely. So his whole writings was a critique of that and to address that and basically say, man has to create a new society. Now, the late in this century, the communist parties of the world created this concept, started in Russia in 1917, the new socialist man, the new communist man. And that man was endowed with fairness, with equity, with contribution to society and aiding his fellow man. Now, like most things, it sounds good in its writing, but the one fundamental flaw, in my view, in Marxism-Leninism, and we've got to add in Friedrich Engels. Friedrich Engels totally agreed with Karl Marx, so did Leon Trotsky, and Trotsky was probably the brightest of the three intellectually. And Trotsky did believe in it and said, look, the old ways have to change. We have to create more balance in human life and fairness. Now, again, that sounds good. But the one difficulty for Marxism and Engels was it could not tolerate an opposition. It could not tolerate someone saying, well, look, I don't agree with you, Karl, and I'd like to be able to, even if you get to power, I want to be able to oppose because I think your philosophy is flawed. Now, probably he had those debates when he was alive in London in the 1880s. Everything I've read of him, he doesn't seem to be an intolerant man, but unfortunately his view of this new world meant ultimately, and Engels and Lenin really did push this further, abolition of marriage. There's no marriage. Children belong to everyone. So if you have a child, it's not yours. It belongs to the state. It's the state's responsibility to house, educate, and do everything. Now, as we saw with the 45 years of Eastern European countries, the quality of goods compared to the West, when you had the Mercedes-Benz, which I think most people would know as a brilliantly engineered piece of automotive substance. The Russians produced the ZIL.
Look, I think the issue is that it stifles competition and initiative. So from the point of view of, well, that'll do because, now we've got something. That's as enough. Opposed to, you know what, I can build it better, but I do need to be rewarded for better.
And Marxism, Leninism can't handle things like that philosophically. So that's, and I've said this many times, because Marxism, communism is at the extreme left of the political spectrum and Nazism was at the extreme right, the thing common to them both is they can't tolerate opposition.
Yes.
So they've got to be the sole party in power, and we see it now in China. And so
And you can see that how these sort of ideologies bloom because you go through the industrial revolution.
Yes.
You have those who run the business who are horrendously rich. Those who are working in the business are horrendously poor.
Yep.
And you have that discrepancy between rich and poor. But again, there is, if you look at today's society, there is a middle class, and that is us working out that that's not good enough, but we'll find a middle ground.
Yeah, we will, and I think that's a good way to express it. So what happened? This view, no family, the family is gone, no religion, it just is a materialist state. Forget all this dreaming about the Holy Spirit, and it's nonsense, and it has shackled mankind since he first stood up out of the primeval ooze.
Now,
but you would
before we get the phone calls, we're talking about Fabianism. We're not talking about our views.
No, we're not. And listeners should be responsible as well and listen carefully and don't run away. And so this is the basis of Fabianism.
It is.
The Fabians accepted, and then in 1926, after the horror of the First World War, something like 32 million dead and crowns and empires falling, the Frankfurt School really picked up on this. No religion, no family, everything belongs to the state, no private ownership of property. Everyone will have the same. So you don't need to have 30 acres compared to someone with one. You will have your property and it will be provided by the state. Now that is ultimately communism. There's no need for money, but socialism was the step from capitalism through to communism. Socialism, state owned everything, but you could generate. Okay, so the Frankfurt School picked that up. Now, the Fabians hold to that still today. So if you meet a Fabian, ask them, what's the role of the opposition? Now, the answer will be, well, they'll be arrested because they are seeking to undermine the fairness of the state. Now, this all grew out of, go back to Marx writing, it grew out of, there's got to be a better way. We have to have more fairness. We have to have more equity. You use the example of the Industrial Revolution,
sure,
where people lived in, anyone who's seen Downton Abbey, that is an earl's house in the south of England. He's not even a marquis or a duke, two higher positions. Look at that house. He lived in it. He owned land. All the farmers that on those great estates might have had 1,000 acres and growing corn and growing wool, but about a third of everything they earned had to be paid back to the big boss in Downton Abbey because it was really his land. He was letting you live on it, and you might have had a nice home, many did, but you never owned that land, and your son, he either moved into it when you died. And in that you saw the creation of what you rightly mentioned. As we got bit more equity, bit more fairness, we developed a middle class.
Correct.
And that middle class didn't have massive wealth. It's like we are basically middle class. I live in a nice house in a nice suburb. I did and do a good job. I had education. I'm not told by the state what I am to do, although we're seeing in our society now much greater creep in Western liberal societies of the power of the state.
Yes, absolutely we are. And we're seeing that more and more often. In fact, the last election was one of the ones that really opened my eyes to our political parties, or one specifically, being completely out of touch with the people.
Well, look, anyone who goes onto their YouTubes and sees, there is a lot of talk now about a worldwide conspiracy that all Western nations are all tied into that COP23, all tied into climate change. And there's not a lot of debate. I think you'd have to be pretty ill-informed to say there is no climate change. I think climate change is observable. But it's been observable for as long as man has walked on this planet. And so the policies to deal with it tend to be internationally uniform. And so people are saying, like the debate now about the COVID vaccine, and I see the Queensland Police and the government have reinstated the Queensland Police who refused to be vaccinated during 2020, 2021 too, and are paying them back the benefits they lost.
Wow.
Now here is people after the event saying, oh, look, it was basically an infringement of fundamental rights. Now, during the COVID vaccine period, I worked with lawyers who said, I'm not going to be vaccinated, and if I lose my job, I will deal with it later. Well, we're now finding that a lot of what governments did, particularly this government under Anastasia Palaszczuk, is now being criticised as a breach of fundamental human rights.
Wow.
Wow.
That is a very interesting point.
And all Miss Palaszczuk was doing, I think to be fair to her, she was just following what all the other premiers were doing.
Well, following medical advice. We were trying to save lives during the course of that
that's
thing.
Fair.
And I think I always love these things that come well after the event. It is very easy with the benefit of a hindsight to go, oh, we were wrong there, who can we blame? Well, you know what, you stand up and make some decisions with the information you had in hand at the time.
But the point is that you're right. Everyone was trying to save lives, but people were criticising, look at that West Australian Premier, who virtually locked the state out and said, no, there can be no interaction between the Commonwealth of Australia and Western Australia. You see, I have no doubt he really believed that what he was doing was right, and he was acting on medical advice. But the trouble is, always when there's a look in physics, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Correct.
And what happens, I think, was governments failed to look at more fairly their actions to then say, now what will the reaction be to this? And how do we find a middle ground? Because I think in these type of incidences, middle ground is not found. They go to extreme ground and then justify what they're doing on the basis of, I care for you, I want the best for you. And look, taking it right back to the writings of Karl Marx, he was criticising things like that back in 1880s.
And look, the readings that I've done in recent times, and look, I wasn't very informed on Fabianism, they seem to say, well, socialism failed because it was a violent event. It was a coup. It was not done correctly. We're going to do it through infiltration and slowly but surely change the people's thinking towards those sort of views. You must have seen
their catch cry.
Yes.
We will bring in Fabianism, socialism, ultimately communism, through evolution, not through revolution.
Correct.
Now, you maybe say, look, that is happening now, because look at the cries of young intellectuals under the age of 40 saying, you know, socialism is the way to go. Basically, modern left of centre in Western centralist democracies are basically saying that, whether it's the Labour parties, whether it's the Democrats in the US, they're basically saying that. And when they get met with the criticism, which is fair and legitimate, it was tried. Between 1917 and 1990, some of the most brilliant civilizations, such as Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia in Europe, and others in Asia, tried it, and it failed.
It did.
And then you get the answer, and I've heard this, I've been at seminars where young stand, because it wasn't done properly.
Yes, I've heard that too.
And my answer is, how do you do one party matters properly? Because the nature of the human condition is to we don't all agree.
No.
And at least in
our
society,
we're all different.
We're all different. And we tolerate that difference. But that's being attacked now under wokeism. But we did tolerate it, and we still do. And we're not banning non-Labour political parties. But I don't think it'll be maybe too long unless we take a good look at ourselves before people start standing up and saying, you know, the left is always the most compassionate. The right is always hardline. Therefore, the left should be the dominant force in human life going into the 21st century. And then it moves to, let's make it there can only be parties of the left. Now, humans are inherently untrustworthy. They will tend to push their own barrow. How many humans have you ever known, Col, who love being corrected and shown publicly that they are wrong?
Look, the bits that get me is you hear these statements, and these are some from past or present political leaders.
Yes.
That our tax system is faulty and needs to be changed. How can 60-odd% of the revenue that the government receives come from income tax and small business. Yeah. That's just not right.
It is, you're right.
If we change that, we won't be in government again next term, so we better just Band-Aid it, poke it, prod it. You hear things like, why is there no cohesive policy around energy and how we're going to fix that? And you'll hear statements like, because the other side sits there and thinks that wind and solar will solve it. Laugh, laugh, laugh. It's better as a political football. Hey, you're there to govern the country on our behalf. That's the preface that you need to bear in mind with every decision you make.
Look, that is so correct. And again, it's up to every government, whether it's Labor, a coalition or whatever, to always have a monitor in the society on what the majority are thinking. Now, UK is facing that now with allowing those rape gangs to operate up in the north of England for over 30 years, and the police just turned a blind eye to it. And why did they turn a blind eye to it? It's now come out because they didn't want to be called racists or Islamophobes. And so what this new party, Reform UK, one of its policies is, if it gets into power, and it has 30% of the vote already, it's going to institute Royal Commission of Inquiry into why for 25 odd years governments knew that this was happening and turned a blind eye to it.
Look, and it happens.
And that was because, and that was because the government was more interested in being seen to be fair to certain groups rather than prosecuting the law.
And look, this is the funny thing about our society nowadays. It is right and wrong doesn't seem to be at the forefront of anything anymore. And if you look at social media, it is what's popular and what's funny.
Yes.
So we've missed the right and wrong in that equation and what we're reviewing. I remember the early days of watching television, and we watched Looney Tunes, and the good guy always won and the bad guy always lost. And that was the moral of the story all the way through your cartoon travel as a child.
Now, the trouble is, though, that while it's childlike entertainment, it doesn't depict reality. But we've now moved to the whole side, let's show reality in all its nastiness, ugliness and danger.
Yes.
And so we hopefully will we start moving back to a middle ground.
And that's what we do need to do. I mean, the business of computer games and TV depicting people being stabbed left or right and centre. Well, what's happening in our society? We're seeing people mimic what they see every day.
Yeah, and more news has been spent on Greta Thunberg than the question of, is there basis in what you're doing? Now, anyone who supports Palestine will say, yes, they were going there to help create a state of Palestine. Now, that in itself is lovely, but the Muslim Brotherhood and Palestine policy is from the river to the sea, and no one is asking them, what does that actually mean? Now, I heard one rather fatuous woman in a hijab say, well, it means it's the state of Palestine and the Jews can live here in freedom and keep their land, but it's under the rule of Muslim Hamas, Hezbollah, and you want to say, for heaven's sake, young lady, be realistic. There is an inveterate hatred of the Jewish people. Do you think they'll continue to be doctors, lawyers, and have members in this state of Palestine's parliament? And we face now a real question, because the concept of a two-state solution with a Muslim, with Hamas, probably a lot of Gazans, and a lot of the Muslim world is, no, we don't support a two-state solution anymore. So what happens? Where do the Jewish people go?
They will never give that up, mate. They will fight to the end.
Oh, they will.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we've got to really take stock of ourselves. Now, Fabianism, for its nobility and its ideology, is not the answer. because it will ultimately suppress man.
And that's exactly what we've proved that socialism and communism does.
Well, we've never had a communist state.
No.
And we don't have one.
No.
China is still socialist. But you look, what are the socialist countries of the world left today? Cuba, Vietnam, China. North Korea is just a vile military dictatorship.
Yes, indeed. It's interesting, and it's well worth knowing about these components of. We talk about wokeism. Fabianism is another aspect, and we do need to be aware of these types of ideologies because they come in under a lovely little name, Fabianism.
Yeah, they do, and they sound good.
And you need to define exactly what it is behind the situation. Oh, they do sound good. Look, socialism and...
They sound fair.
And Marx's, all of Marx's books read really, really well. They're a lovely, sweet potion.
Well, I wouldn't say the 5 volumes of Capital, which is that's the most difficult 5 volumes ever to read.
But it spins well is probably the best way that I...
Yes, and that's a good way to say.
Rolling off the tongue, it sounds wonderful and rosy and a lovely little storybook tale. Put it into practice, and unfortunately the human condition doesn't...
Well, as I said in the past, Marx failed to recognise that many humans, not all, I've met die-hard materialists who say there is no God. The only thing is what I can see, what I can hear, what I can touch. I've met others who have said to me, David, I've always known of the otherness of life.
Absolutely.
And that's true.
There you go.
Well, what are we doing next week, Cole?
Oh, I'm not sure. That will be one of those discussions. I know we've got about 4 or 5 topics in the melting pot.
Good.
So we just need to choose another one.
All right. Well, you'll put it up on the website.
We will indeed. All right. We're at the end of the program. David Ashton Lewis, thank you very much for your time this morning. We better move into local news.
Thank you.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4crb.com.